Good morning and welcome to Mountain Standard Time. I'm your host, Nathan Giede, and today we'll be speaking with Chris Elston, who, of course, is an activist fighting for the innocence of our children here in British Columbia and attempting to take out the SOGI curriculum in BC. But first, I have an opening statement. So I think that one of the things we need to be honest about is if we were to try to figure out what's wrong with the world today, the simplest explanation was once given by G.K. Chesterton. What's wrong with the world today? It's me. If everybody followed their conscience accordingly, the world would improve immensely. And every time we excuse our actions, we add to the denigration of our species as well as our civilization. But if we're looking for a conceptual framework, a catch-all for what is causing so many of our ills, it is hard to do better than fatherlessness. Without a father figure, flawed as he might be, children grow up stunted, often lacking proper self-regulation and respect for boundaries. As they become adolescents and adults, unresolved issues result in a broken sense of self-identity, as well as unhealthy, unstable relationships with their spouses, family, society, and authority. Rebuttals or pearl clutching on this point are a waste of breath. We all know this is a fact, and we all know it's an epidemic ever since the nuclear family began breaking down throughout the post-war era. I have my own opinion on what occurred there, but let's simply acknowledge that families are in a worse state today than they were probably 2 generations ago. How I think about myself as a man was very much influenced by my father, who, though not my biological parent, took his role with grace and love. It is not hard for me to imagine how much worse off I would be without his influence, and that absence could have made me quite susceptible to many things. Today, amongst children who are unhappy due to many factors, one of the paths to happiness celebrated in all of our schools is irreversible change to one's gender. Where this agenda has been resisted most strongly is amongst parents who take their role seriously, but especially fathers. The ancient instinct of protection has been activated, and men who have children have begun taking an interest in what goes on in the classroom that they subsidize with their tax dollars. The fight has begun for the most foundational questions we have around children, innocent consents, and what qualifies as medicine. It is a battle of epic paradigms. We're going to learn more about that today thanks to Chris Elston. Let me simply end by saying that the epidemic of fatherlessness is what got us into this mess. And so it is right and just that fatherhood would get us out. May God help us recover what is a true masculine vocation. We will go to Chris live. Welcome to the program, Chris.
Thank you, Nathan. Thanks for having me.
So let's start right from the very top. How did you get involved with fighting the SOGI curriculum, and where did you get your impetus for your activism?
Well, it's a bit of a long story, but we have some time today.
Yes, we do.
So I just became really aware of everything that was going on. And it seemed, especially last year, every month things were getting nuttier and nuttier. Mm-hmm. Not just with what's going on with kids, but with what's going on with women. And I have 2 girls. They're 9 and 11 years old now. And so they're going to be women one day. And I'm not super happy about the state of things today. But there was a woman in Scotland named Posey Parker who put up a sign. She put up a poster outside the Edinburgh train station that said, "I heart J.K. Rowling, the children's author," because she's spoken out about these issues affecting kids and women. And it got taken down right away. Censorship, right? So I just thought, well, that bugged me a lot, because when we can't put up a simple sign that says, "I heart J.K. Rowling," who's just the greatest children's author probably the world's ever known, who's a lovely woman, and we can't even say that, that's a pretty crazy society. So I just kind of had enough of everything that was going on. And so I put up a billboard in East Vancouver that said the same thing. And I guess somewhat predictably, it got paint bombed overnight. And then a Vancouver City Councillor named Sarah Kirby-Young said it was hate speech. And she made some noise to Pattison Outdoor, Jimmy Pattison's company, the sign company. And the very next day, on a weekend, they brought in installers to cover the sign up. And so it didn't even last 24 hours. But that was okay, because there's something called the Streisand effect. And when people try to censor you, it often results in the message reaching many more people than it otherwise would have done, which is exactly what happened. And so there was so much outrage online. I went on Twitter and I said, if you want to do this in your city, I'll help. I'll take the heat. I know a lot of us have to stay anonymous, but I just need help with funding. And so right away, an executive, a woman in Silicon Valley, reached out, and we ended up, I had to raise some more money. She sent me a decent chunk of change, and I had to raise some more money from Canadians, and I got that all done that night. And then less than a week later, we had a billboard up in San Francisco. And then another pretty wealthy person, a businessman, reached out from the United States, and we ended up doing digital billboards all across the country, ending in Times Square. Did Portland, Oregon, Los Angeles, all throughout Utah. I did a separate project where I did the underground, the subway system in Washington, D.C., and finished off that campaign with Times Square. But I didn't want to stop there because, I mean, those are just some billboards, and they make some news for a little while, but then it goes away. And the only way we change this as citizens is to be consistent, persistent, and never stop until we win. Because the other side is never going to stop, and they have millions of dollars. We have nothing. I'm not a rich guy. I'm just a regular guy. I drove my kids to school half an hour ago, got to pick them up later. I'm trying to juggle everything in life and doing all this stuff as well. But we have to consistently speak up, and it's not enough to do it online, because online everyone's in their own little echo chamber, and it might feel like you're reaching a lot of people if you get 1,000 likes on a tweet or something, but really it's nothing. This has to be out in the real world, talking to everyday people. So I got some signs made that I wear like a sandwich board, and usually my sign on my front says children cannot consent to puberty blockers. On my back, I usually have one that says children are never born in the wrong body. I have signs that say gender ideology does not belong in schools. I have some I Heart J.K. Rowling ones. I made up a new definition of dad, which is a human male who protects his kids from gender ideology. And so I wear that one sometimes. And I just hang out on street corners in downtown Vancouver, and I've been traveling the country as well. And I just go to wherever it's busy, just have conversations with whoever wants to have them. So I just stand there, and if someone asks me what puberty blockers are, I have a conversation, and they get educated. And then they go home, and hopefully they have that conversation. And then every once in a while, events happen, and it reaches several thousand or several 100,000 or several million people, like what happened after I got attacked in Montreal. I guess most people watching this probably won't know, but I was in Montreal 6 weeks ago, and 5 people, 4 men and a woman, I'm told. The police tell me it's 5 people. They reviewed the footage, and they jumped me, and I got punched in the face, punched in the back of the head, got my signs ripped off me, lost my body cam. As I was backing away, a guy picked up a large traffic cone, which I wasn't that worried about because it's just a traffic cone, but the base is pretty thick, I guess, and he kept swinging it at me, and I kept blocking it with my left forearm, and one of those blows broke my ulna. So it's doing fine now. I'm getting my strength back, but it's a crazy world out there when you can't even advocate for protecting kids who are being prescribed an off-label drug that was originally designed to treat prostate cancer and has never had any clinical trials done for the purpose that it's being used. So to answer your original question, sorry, I got sidetracked. What spurred me on to do this? I have girls, and I'm getting older. I looked around at the world, and I thought, who is going to go out onto the streets and try to spread awareness with the broader populace? And the answer that came back to me was nobody. So I just felt like I then had to do it. So that's what I'm doing.
It's inspiring. It's an inspiring and well, honestly, it sounds like a calling out, not a calling out of yourself, but being brought out of something and being brought into the greater narrative of things. It's kind of biblical, actually. It's pretty brilliant. I think that to the point of starting those conversations, people today don't converse. What's your conversation? What have they been like? What has it been like to kind of break that fourth wall when everybody is living in their echo chamber? What has that been like to reach out and try to bring people on side?
Boy, well, it's fun. I've been arrested twice. I've had tons of abuse, death threats, all that sort of stuff. But I don't focus on that stuff because that's all just noise. You know, we focus way too much on the scary things. It's important to know that that stuff's out there, I guess. But the vast, overwhelming majority of people are completely and utterly 100% supportive. 8, 9 out of 10 people that I talk to, even in Vancouver, downtown Vancouver, which is a pretty woke city, they're very supportive. It's just that the people who are against this are very vocal and very angry and very emotional. They don't know how to talk. They can't carry a conversation. All they can do is yell and scream and swear. But they're just inconsequential. It doesn't matter. What matters is that we get this message out to just the regular people, and especially parents, because parents simply don't know what is being taught to our kids in school. They have no idea. In 2000, I guess it was 2016, when this legislation passed to introduce SOGI 123 into our schools in British Columbia, the government forced it through first, second, and third reading all in an afternoon. There was no debate about this. There was no consultation with parents. They just snuck it through. And then they funded this company called the ARC Foundation, which put all these materials together. And like we've seen with this father that's sitting in jail right now, this has real world consequences, because the daughter of this father, who's now sitting in jail because he refused to stop speaking out about the harm coming to his kid. The daughter was a student in the Delta School District. Delta is the first district that started off with SOGI 123. They were part of the pilot program. And the very first year, because of school teachings, this girl decided to transition to being a boy, which of course is an impossibility and brings with it irreversible damage when they start medicalizing themselves. But that's what this school curriculum is now doing. It's brainwashing, it's indoctrinating, it's confusing children. And there is no shortage of therapists out there, of endocrinologists, of woke people who are all in on this ideology and will just affirm these children only. There's no other condition in life where we let children self-diagnose with a serious medical condition and then go on to a medical pathway of self-harm. Yet that's what all of our clinicians are now promoting as best practice for these children. It's totally nuts.
A lot of people say that it started with the philosophical breakdown of thinking that, you know, obviously gender and sex were directly connected. There's no question that, of course, there can be dysphoria between those things. This has been an ongoing discussion in theology and philosophy for years, especially when it comes to the question of men, because unlike women, their biological change through adolescence doesn't just kind of necessarily inherently give them purpose. It becoming a man is not just a cultural trope. It's something that is actually psychologically and biologically true in the sense that, you know, just because you can now procreate doesn't mean that you're ready for procreation. With kind of what's happened and what you've observed, do you think that a lot of this is just misplaced angst around purpose, around happiness? Is it what are people doing this for? Is it just all about power of this agenda, or is there some kind of legitimate question that has been twisted and directed the wrong way?
So going back in time, activists have been lying, and they've been really successful. This is a propaganda battle that they won. And so now we have to push back and we have to play catch up, because they've gotten their lies into all of our governments and our institutions. So if we go back in time and you want to look at the genesis of some of this, a lot of it stems from just a few really rich white men who themselves as adults now call themselves trans women. They're trans identified males. There's a billionaire named Martine Rothblatt who started XM Sirius Radio and has done a bunch of pharmaceutical stuff and other things. Probably a really smart person, but totally into this ideology. Martine Rothblatt is what we would call a transhumanist. Martine Rothblatt is married to a woman and has had a robot made in the image of his wife. And it's his end goal one day to upload her consciousness into this robot, because he essentially believes that we as humans can live forever. So we get into this religious aspect where these people believe that this is just a shell and we are essentially a soul, but we're a gendered soul. It's our inside that really counts, right? There's nothing scientific to this whatsoever. It's totally an ideology. So Martine Rothblatt has funded a lot of things. Another trans woman named Jennifer Pritzker, another billionaire who is an heir to the Hyatt hotel chain, I believe. This person splashes money around to gender clinics and hospitals around the world. Jennifer Pritzker funded the only chair in transgender studies right here in BC at the University of Victoria. So gave them a few $1 million. They now have a chair in transgender studies. If you go over to Victoria, you can see it reflected on the streets. It's absolutely insane over there. This ideology has completely taken hold. They funded this organization and helped to create it called WPATH, which is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, which lays down standards of care. And in that, though, it's full of fallacies, like just false statements. And just through their activism, and their money, and of course money in the pharmaceutical industry, the pharmaceutical companies are behind this too. There's billions of dollars in this. They started to make headway, and they were forming roots underground for a really long time to get their foundation. And we've seen this thing really take off the last few years, but those roots were forming for a couple decades beforehand. And it's gotten to the point now where they could die tomorrow and it wouldn't matter, because this thing is now being pushed by all of our governments and also by all these different LGBT groups. I say the T kind of separate because it should be separate, because LGB is based on your sexuality. The T isn't about that. It's about this pseudo religion, this gender ideology. And so when gay rights were won, which I'm very happy they were, there were all these organizations under the LGBT umbrella with all of this money, and that money started to pour into the transgender lobby. And so there's a lot of money behind this. And the only people fighting back against it are just regular citizens like myself and like a lot of women online. And more men are getting involved now. But everyone's too afraid to speak out, because as we've seen, this lobby is so powerful that people get fired from their jobs just for stating that they believe in biological sex.
No, it's a genuinely scary thing. It's a genuinely scary thing. We are having a very long conversation today, and that's good. And that's a way that we should do these things, because people need to be eased into this stuff so they can understand it fully. And it's also good to be having this conversation because more people can view it all at once, and more people will view it, of course, as we move forward, as they play it again on YouTube or Facebook, wherever we are. Again, I'm speaking with Chris Elston, and we are talking about the SOGI curriculum in British Columbia and what effect that's having on children today and how we might fight it. We have a comment from one of our viewers, and that's Isabel Oliver, and she is asking us, what is SOGI? Can you talk about the curriculum, what the curriculum actually is? So Chris, why don't you walk us through this a little bit? So we know in general there's this transgender thing going on. We know it's being taught in schools, but what is the core message of SOGI, and how did it get here? What does SOGI even stand for?
Are you able to bring up websites for people to see?
I am. Yeah. If you drop them in the chat, I can send them over to the producer, and the producer will bring them up and screen share them, or Chromecast, or whatever it's called. I'm not the tech guy. You don't want me to do tech.
Okay. 1 second. I'm gonna bring up I have a website page, so I'm gonna put that in the chat here, and then I'll get into this here. So
perfect.
Go to billboardchris.com and go to the section in schools. I actually have some of the lesson plans on there. But SOGI stands for sexual orientation and gender identity. So when we grew up, we had sex education. You learned about the basics of biological sex and how sex works and all that sort of stuff. Today, the focus is on, obviously, sexual orientation. They talk about that. And then there's this entirely different subject now, different than what we had when we were growing up. Yeah, let's stop right there, Nathan. I'll get into that one in a second, where we talk about gender identity. And so gender identity is essentially being taught that it's your true inner self, that it's how you feel inside. And this is totally based on stereotypes. So if a girl is a tomboy and does what we traditionally consider to be stereotypically masculine things, we are now teaching these children that they are actual boys. This sounds crazy, but it's true. And they believe it, Nathan. This is the thing. On Twitter just yesterday, I'll read this in a second, but there's a text message conversation from a 12-year-old girl to her therapist that I shared. And this is a girl who's just having a bit of a tough time. She was really happy when she was 11. Now she's 12, she's not, and she thinks she's a boy. And the therapist, this girl's clearly confused, but the therapist is pushing it on her that she's actually a boy because she has a boy brain and a boy heart. And anyway, what we're looking at here, this is an actual lesson plan. If you go to bc.sogieducation.org, that's their official website, but I've got the links on my site here. And this is an actual lesson plan for kindergartners, from like kindergarten to grade 3. The kids will get a card. And as you can see here, they get a card, and their job is to walk around the class and introduce themselves based on their assigned cards. So, hi, my name is Alex. Please call me they. My name is Aaron. Please call me they. My name is Lee. Please call me he. You know, some of these might be, you know, for Kim, and please call me she, or it might be Kim, please call me he. They're already indoctrinating these kids into believing, when these children are 4 and 5 years old, that boys and girls don't really exist as a biological thing. It's just whatever you want to be. And obviously, that's just ridiculous. This can all sound about being inclusive and diverse, and that's how they sell these things. Nothing that's truly evil in society never comes out with big red devil horns on it. It always looks nice on the surface, but you have to dig down and you have to see the repercussions and the consequences of what's actually happening. And what's actually happening is that we're giving kids gender dysphoria. We're causing body dissociation. These kids are ending up at gender clinics where these ideological doctors then just, no questions asked, it's called gender affirming care, they just prescribe drugs and then cross-sex hormones. So this is the Genderbread person. This is another approved resource for teachers to use. This resource right here is one of the most used resources across the world, actually. You'll find it in the children's hospitals, you'll find it everywhere. And it's full of lies. Like right in the bottom right there, it says sex assigned at birth. First of all, we don't assign sex at birth. It's not a choice. We observe sex at birth, and 99.995% of the time it's easily observable. There are people with conditions, which you'll see it listed here, they call them intersex, as though that's a third sex. Intersex is actually a misnomer. The proper word used for this should be a variation of sex development or a disorder of sex development. It's where something went wrong during the kid's development. And so, anyway, they're all male or female. Ultimately, what determines our sex is the type of gametes we produce. I produce small gametes, women produce large gametes. We have sperm, they have eggs. This is ultimately what determines what sex we are, because we are a sexually dimorphic species, meaning there is only male and there are only females. That's it. And people don't have to like that for it to be true. It's just the way it is. But the trans activists really don't like that. And so they will scream bloody murder if you try to just present basic scientific fact. And so as we see here on this genderbread person, our gender, it says, is on a scale. It's on a, there's another handout where they like ask you basically to pick between 0 and 100 where you fall on this scale. You might want to just stay there, yeah. And the whole thing is based on stereotypes. It's about your interests, your hobbies, your likes, your dislikes, what jobs you want to do when you're older. And we're teaching these kids that it's just stereotypes that determine their gender. And we never should have actually split the word gender apart from sex. It was used synonymously as maybe more of a polite term for the word sex. But now they're just turning it into a religion, basically, where stereotypes determine who you are. They speak out of both sides of their mouth. They say in one sentence that stereotypes are totally unimportant and you should just express yourself however you want. And I agree completely with that. But then in the very next sentence, they say that, well, because you don't fit into this box of what we consider a girl to be, that means you're actually a boy. And it's all based on Western regressive stereotypes. It's totally nuts.
I think that's something else that kind of needs to be noted here is that if gender is so inessential, why would it be so essential to transition to a different gender? If you can be anything you want to be, then why is there a imperative to ensure that children transition? What that doesn't seem to make any sense. Either gender is important or it's not. This always seems to be a problem inside of various radical ideas. I won't even call them progressive ideas because I don't think they're progressive. But various radical ideas that I come into contact with in the political world is that they, as you just said, speak both sides of their mouth simultaneously. Speak out on both sides of their mouth. They say this must change, this must stop, right? Or this religious symbol has to be taken down, or gender is inessential. How dare you impose your ideas around gender or sex or gender roles upon me? Then simultaneously, there must be a revolution to change it all. But if that had been the case, then why is any of it essential to begin with? Where's the argument? Where's the crime?
So my working theory on some of this stuff is that creepy men have forced this into our schools kind of to buy legitimacy for themselves. Because if gender ideology and gender identity is actually a thing, and it affects millions and millions of kids now, well, it kind of buys them legitimacy. You know what I mean? And it's not that they aren't legitimate. People are going to take this and say it's hate speech or something. But traditionally, gender dysphoria affected a tiny fraction of the population. It affected mostly young boys. So gender dysphoria, as a definition, starts really young and persists into adolescence. What we're seeing today is not that. We're seeing a craze affecting primarily young girls who never had any dysphoria before in their lives until they get to high school and maybe just before that. And life starts getting tough because puberty's tough and there's a lot of anxiety and angst, and this is normal. Mm-hmm. But if you can convince society that this is just, normal to switch sexes, and it's normal to medicalize yourself, and it's normal to block puberty, well, I don't know, the people that started this were autogynephilic men. So autogynephilia is a condition where men get aroused by the idea of themselves being a woman. And so they dress up as women and all that sort of stuff. If an adult wants to present however they want to present, they should go for it. But we shouldn't be pushing this stuff on kids. And that's what we're doing. And these lesson plans lead to trips to the counselor's office. The counselors then affirm these children more, thus solidifying the delusion that they can switch sex even more. Then they go to the gender clinics at the children's hospitals, who also only affirm these children. They don't do any questioning. They don't do talk therapy. They don't look into, is there autism? They don't look into, has there been abuse? Has there been sexual abuse? Is there trauma going on in the family? They don't look into anything. They simply prescribe these drugs as though I was going to the doctor, said I had a headache, and he prescribed me Advil. It's no different. I was just in Ottawa, and a girl in 20 minutes went into the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, and in 20 minutes, on her first appointment with the endocrinologist, she was prescribed Lupron. It's an injection of this prostate cancer drug. It's a drug also used to treat endometriosis, but it's never been used for these purposes. And this whole thing is a giant experiment on children. And so anyway, how can a doctor know a child in 20 minutes? How can he know anything about anybody in 20 minutes? It's impossible. Yet we take this drastic step of blocking puberty in them. This drug, it's called Lupron. It's also been prescribed to the harshest sex offenders, pedophiles, in order to chemically castrate them. And what it does is it stops the pituitary gland from releasing the hormones that trigger your secondary sex characteristics and your bones to gain density and everything that happens during puberty. None of that stuff will occur. So girls' breasts won't grow, boys' penises won't grow, girls' pelvises won't expand, bones won't gain any density. It increases the chance for heart attacks, blood clots. A lot of these girls, after 5 years on testosterone, they have to get their uterus removed, either as a prophylactic because their chance of cancer is so much greater, or because what this drug will do after prolonged use, what testosterone treatment does after prolonged use, is it causes vaginal atrophy, it causes uterine atrophy, causes abdominal pain, and they have to get their uterus removed. So we are sterilizing perfectly healthy children because when they're 12 years old, they say, I'm actually a boy, and we just go along with it. And it starts in the schools. So it's child abuse, and it's not affecting 1 or 2 kids here and there. Virtually every school in the country now has a girl who's wanting to transition. Entire peer groups of girls are wanting to transition. It's cool. It's celebrated. And all of these kids have depression, anxiety disorders, something else going on. A lot of them have autism. At some of these gender clinics, up to 40% of these kids have autism. And the studies that we do have, which go back decades, for kids with genuine gender dysphoria, that they followed these kids for years and years, decades even, the vast majority of these children with gender dysphoria, when they went through puberty, their dysphoria desisted. It went away. And so it's only safe to assume that this current craze, affecting primarily girls, the desistance rate will be even higher, because this isn't genuine gender dysphoria. This is just natural teenage angst and exploring of identities that we then put on steroids and give them drugs to help them transition and permanently alter their bodies. And they'll never have their sexual function restored. Boys end up with a 12-year-old penis for life. You know, some of this stuff gets pretty graphic, but it has to be spoken because this is what's happening. All in the name of inclusivity. It's not okay.
The other day I was on just a quick chat with a mutual friend of ours, Stuart Parker, and he made the point that he's just referring to this movement as the new eugenicists now, that because of the way they're seizing children, and that some of these children are clearly children who have disabilities, and of course, or backgrounds that are disadvantaged or underprivileged, and even so for particular ethnicities that have both those things as part of the struggle they have, that there is a eugenics sort of thing happening here, that people are essentially attacking a certain class and group and even ethnicity, perhaps even race of people. Really, if we look at it, it's not that there isn't any diversity there, but that a great deal of the seizures that are happening and everything else are directly related to these questions. Is this just, I mean, power begets power, absolute power corrupts absolutely. These powerful men that came up with these ideas, are they just influencing the world in this negative way because they want to just dominate other people? Is that what happened here? Is it that simple? It really is that dastardly?
No, I don't think so, but that's my opinion. It's just my opinion. These men genuinely believe. I mean, it's not just men. Honestly, pushing this stuff today, it's primarily young women who are into this ideology, under 25. That's 9 out of 10 abusive comments I get on the street are from young women. But that's because they've been indoctrinated. And they've been to university, or they go to gender studies classes, which are now the renamed women's studies. It's not women's studies anymore, it's gender studies. And they're more empathetic than young men, and they all know girls who are transitioning. So it only makes sense that they get mad at me when they see me on the street because they see me as some bigot. But I'm telling you, the scope of this, it's breathtaking, how widespread this belief has become. But to answer your question, is this a eugenics movement? in effect, it's like eugenics, but I honestly believe that these people consider that we are a gendered soul, and it is just our inside feelings that matter, and they're pushing this stuff. But then at the same time, they're lying. So I guess I don't have an answer for all of that, because they're lying and they know they're lying. So it is evil. I call this evil because that's what it is, because we're harming kids, especially our most vulnerable kids. Where that evil comes from and its genesis, I don't have the answer to that. Where does Wallace Wong come from? Where does he get his beliefs? Wallace Wong is a psychologist in British Columbia who treats a lot of these kids. And he has said in a recorded talk he gave at a library that he himself, this is his own words, he's transitioning over 1,000 children in BC, including more than 500 orphans and foster kids, many of whom are Indigenous, many of whom have autism, most of whom will probably grow up to be gay or lesbian, because all of our studies show the majority of these kids, once they grow up and they figure themselves out, most of them are just gay. So this is gay conversion therapy like we've never seen it before, because we're actually altering their bodies and transitioning them to the other sex. It's like what happens in Iran. In Iran, it's illegal to be gay, punishable by death. So they force gay people to transition, because then instead of being a gay man, then they're a straight trans woman. Or these people have to flee for asylum. So it's what we're doing, it's what they're doing in Iran, and we're doing it here, and we're calling it kindness.
I think the other thing that needs to kind of be noted here too is that it's funny because there is a bit of an intersection here. The other day we were talking about the vaccine. This isn't a commentary on the vaccine itself, but the point is that if there's nowhere else for kind of the ACLU sort of people, civil liberties people, to kind of stand in solidarity on this exact question, regardless of which way they're coming from, it's that just as the government maybe shouldn't be able to mandate you get the jab, maybe the government shouldn't be wielding the scalpel that would leave you sterile. We had arguments about this. There's been cases in Canada about sterilization because it was happening on reservations in order to alleviate poverty. Again, another eugenics stance that happened. This happened through the interwar period. We have it on record that this was happening. The government had to pay back millions at some point. It had to admit that it had been wrong. Do you think that at some point, if the tide turns and this is finally stopped, what are going to be the repercussions? Is not society going to have to do a gigantic mea culpa when they finally admit that they were wrong about this?
We are, and I hope every one of these kids gets millions, because we owe it to them, because they're in our care. And we're hurting them badly for life. These girls that start on testosterone, once they start, they have to stay on it for life. There's almost $1 million in this for the pharmaceutical companies over the lifetime of these patients. It's a little different in Canada because we have socialized medicine, but down in the States, there's very much a financial incentive for transitioning these kids, because all these doctors are making huge bank every time they get one. They're getting over $100,000 just to do a sex reassignment surgery. And more than 100% of the time, if you look at 100 surgeries, for every 100 surgeries done, there's like 150 complications with these surgeries.
Yep.
It's completely unethical what's happening. We have 13-year-old girls getting double mastectomies. We have in BC, the Infants Act says that parents have no say to stop the medical intervention of these children. Because if the doctor, who is a totally ideologically driven lunatic, if the doctor who transitions children for a living, this is what he does, or she, if the doctor deems it necessary, which obviously they're going to deem it necessary, that's all that's needed. The doctor says the child understands, and the doctor does not need parental approval. And that's exactly what happened to the daughter of this father here in BC. The father received a letter from the BC Children's Hospital stating that parents could be friends and advisors to their daughter. but they can't stop the medical transition. And this girl was only 13 when she signed this consent form. And on this consent form to start on testosterone, it says right on the form that we have no information about the long-term effects. So if we have no information, how's it possible for a 13-year-old to give informed consent? This is an impossibility. So we need lawyers to start challenging this. We need brave, young adults who have been through this, and minors with their parents, to sue. That's the only way we're going to change this, because the government has completely washed its hands of any responsibility. I know that for a fact because I've talked to them, and they won't discuss it. And so in the UK, there's a woman named Kira Bell, she's 23 years old now. When she was 16, she went to the only gender clinic in the UK, which is called the Tavistock. And she went on puberty blockers, she got testosterone, she got a double mastectomy. And then in her early 20s, she went, whoa, what have you guys done to me? I was a kid struggling with different issues, and I was just told right away that transitioning is the answer. And it's not. The studies we have show that it doesn't improve gender dysphoria. There's a honeymoon phase for at least the first year, because obviously if you give a kid something they've been obsessing about forever and not all the long-term impacts have set in yet, there's going to be that honeymoon phase because they got what they wanted. But over the long term, it makes gender dysphoria even worse. We are told, and parents are told, that if we don't let their kids transition, that they will commit suicide. Dr. Wallace Wong, in that very talk I was just referring to, literally says that if kids aren't getting the drugs they want quick enough, you know what? He says, pull a stunt. Say you're going to commit suicide. It works every time. So these kids are being coached on what to say as well to their parents and to therapists. And parents faced with their beautiful child, who they've been through all those moments with their whole life, sacrificing everything to bring up this beautiful, innocent child. These parents are being given this option by so-called professionals that it's either transition or suicide. What's it going to be, Mom? So parents go along with this too, because they're told that it's the liberal, nice thing to do. It's just crazy.
It's beyond crazy. It's the other day I had to make a reference to something about the lockdowns that are happening in BC and whatever else, and I said it reads like a badly written sophomore attempt at dystopian fiction, but it's like, this is what it is. This is beyond dystopian. This is literally, it's literally the destruction of children and the destruction of innocence. I mean, maybe I'm not trying to pull us off message or anything like that, but is there not an argument then for those of us who are like, I would consider myself a traditionalist. I'm a devout Roman Catholic. I was raised a Protestant in a pretty strong Protestant background, and obviously pretty socially conservative. And so, I mean, without trying to be a reactionary and without trying to say, like, that the socially conservative people told the more socially liberal people that they were proven right in the end or whatever, I think that there's a more charitable way of saying that. But is there not an argument here that maybe the introduction of sex education to begin with at a very young age was when people were objecting to that and they said that this would lead to other questions? Is there a way to bridge that gap, or do people just kind of have to leave aside the various wedges they have against each other, unite and just fight this thing and argue those issues later?
I think we need to just fight this issue. I mean, there has to be sex education in school because, I mean, personally, I'd be fine if my kids didn't get it, because my wife and I teach a lot of stuff to our kids too. We are parents as first educators. That is the philosophy in this house. And if my kids aren't learning math in school, well, I'll teach them math. And my daughter, who's 11 years old now, We gave her a book all about puberty, around when she turned 10. And she read all about that. She learned all about sex and all that stuff in this proper book, But not every kid gets that at home. So we need to have sex education in the schools. Does it need to be so hyper-sexualized where all we're talking about are sexual identities and sexual orientation all the time? I think it's gotten a bit ridiculous in high school now. Like, probably half the kids all have some other identity, or they think they're bisexual, or they think they're this and that when they aren't. But they're all exploring stuff, and that's fine. I'm not trying to sound like a Debbie Downer on that sort of thing. But it's certainly become super hyper-sexualized, a lot of these teachings. I don't think kids, when they're 12 years old, need to be hearing about some of the stuff that's discussed. I think we can keep it a little more simple. But we really need to focus, because it's easy to get sidetracked, and you can't try to go after everything, because we're not going to win every battle. But the one thing that liberals and conservatives all agree on is that boys are boys and girls are girls, that sex, we are male and female, and that children are coming to harm because they're being lied to. Everyone agrees on this once they understand the situation. So we all need to work together and try to stop this. It's okay to work with people who have some different opinions than you. It's okay to even be friends with them. You don't have to agree on everything. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter. We've gotten into this society where, this person has an opinion I don't like, therefore I hate them, and I can never talk to them, and I can never work with them because it's going to make me look bad. I talk to people all the time who have views that I don't share. I'm not going to stop, because these people have kids too, and their followers have kids, and this is about the kids. Mm-hmm. So who cares where their parents' ideology falls or their politics falls? We all need to work together. Yeah.
No, we need to work together, and that's something that I want to be clear that on this show from day one we've been my policy has always been that we are going to talk to people who want to speak freely, right? And that we're not going to censor anybody here, and that we've had quite a few people from across the aisle, like across from me. Then again, there's a lot of people across the aisle from me, as many conservatives who don't agree with what I have to say. But the point is that this is a place of free expression, and this is a place of building those coalitions. That's what I've always wanted this platform to be, and that's what I'm hopeful for. And you can see it in the comments as well. People who sure vote all sorts of ways are all on the same side of this question, which is this is terrible. This needs to stop. One of the things I'd actually like to ask you a little bit about, Chris, is so again, we live in this time of hyper sexualized identity, and also very partisan questions around identity and the identitarian questions, and there's woke crowd. I mean, unless I'm misreading, kind of the pigment of your skin and the fact that you're married with children. I mean, you're a heterosexual white male fighting this question, and then you have to come into have allies in the female world, etc. What's that been like? What's it been like being as you are, and then having to fight this thing in such a minefield, in such a politically tense time?
Well, I'm wearing a pink shirt, Nathan. So are you sure I'm a male? Because it's pink, But no, I am I'm like...
You killed the producer with that one, by the way. He almost fell out of his chair.
Oh, well, it's not that funny. But I am a white male, heterosexual with blue eyes. So right away, I come under all sorts of attack. They're kind of bloodshot today. I need to sleep more. But I don't worry about the haters. There's a lot of haters. Mm-hmm. And there's misandrists out there and whatever. It doesn't matter. You have to block out the noise. If you let the noise cause you to stop doing what you know is right, you'll never do anything, because there's always going to be noise. So, I mean, I could tell you stories for days and days and probably weeks of some crazy stuff that's happened behind the scenes from people who are behaving really badly, trying to stop this campaign. But I just don't worry about it. We got to stay positive. We got to focus on the good that's happening, which is these conversations are good. We are creating awareness. Media are picking things up from time to time, and people are learning the truth, because ultimately the truth will win. It's just a question of how long it takes and how many thousands or tens of thousands of kids are going to come to harm. So I'm just trying to accelerate that process.
Yep. No, completely understand. Again, back to that question of the crime against women, especially as it is right now, it appears to be that the pendulum has swung so that it's more women transitioning than men.
Mm-hmm.
It again, you're the father of daughters, and you see this harm that's being done to the female side of our species. What happened? How did men, or any, and society for that matter, how did men and society and the rest of us ever think that this would be okay? Why did we allow this to happen? Why have we allowed, I mean, whether you want to use a more kind of chivalric sort of language of like the species we're supposed to protect, or if you want to try and use a more equitable language of today of like, well, I mean, we should treat people equally, and the idea that we're going to do violence to young women in this way is horrendous. What happened there? What was the switch? Why don't more men stand up to fight this?
They don't know. They don't know what's going on. How can they know what's going on when the media won't report on it? CBC, CTV, Global, those are our three mainstream news sources. They refuse to report on any of this. I've been interviewed by Global for 5 minutes. I have the video of it. Someone else took a video of me being videoed by Global. They won't release a second of it. All they do is push this ideology more and more and more. The governments are weak and they are cowardly, and they succumbed to a vicious mob that would cancel them if they didn't get what they wanted. The trans lobby, the trans activists, are the biggest babies that have ever existed in the history of the world. And as soon as you call out anything, they just cry and cry and cry and try and get you canceled and try to get you fired. They've come after my wife in her workplace, even, just because she's married to me. She's never said a word about any of this stuff. Yep. But the governments just suck, guys. Like, that's the truth. They suck. These left-wing governments that we currently have are awful because they don't have a spine. And that's just the truth of it, because they know what's happening. I know they know because I've talked to them, because we've sent hundreds of briefs to them. Randall Garrison is an MP with the NDP party who sits on the Justice Committee. So when a bill becomes law in Canada, it goes through 3 readings. First reading is a formality. Second reading is pretty much a formality. It's when people might voice some disagreement, but most of these politicians are still too cowardly to voice their true opinion even at that point. And after second reading, it goes to the Justice Committee, which is 12 members, 12 MPs. Hundreds and hundreds of briefs were sent into this Justice Committee. They couldn't even be bothered to read them. The NDP member, who is Randall Garrison, who's from Vancouver Island, was given a question about detransitioners. Hey, Randall, how do you explain all these young adults who are now detransitioning? It says in this bill that you want to pass, this bill is called Bill C6, there's this new bill. It's about banning conversion therapy. And what it'll do is it's going to make it a criminal offense if anyone, even a professional licensed therapist, is deemed to be trying to convert a child's gender identity. So you get therapists who have practices specializing in kids with gender dysphoria. These people won't be able to do this anymore, because if an activist says they're trying to convert their child's gender identity, they face up to 5 years in prison under this new bill. So anyway, it says in this bill, right in the preamble, it's flawed from the outset, like everything with this ideology. It says right in the beginning that it is a myth that gender identity ever changes. But we know that's not true. Trans activists themselves tell us it's not true. They tell us that gender is fluid. You can be a boy one day, you can be a girl the next. And we have all of these young adults who are now detransitioning. They've been through the medical harm. They've realized, oh my goodness, I was just gay, and you stopped me from going through puberty. And you've caused irreversible damage to me for life. And they go back to being what they truly are, which is female or male. So they transition, then they detransition. But it says in the bill that gender identity never changes. So, Mr. Randall Garrison, how do you explain that? You know what he said, Nathan? He called detransitioners a false narrative.
Yeah.
He knows this stuff is going on, and he simply doesn't care because they are agenda driven, and they won't say one thing that can be seen to be going against the LGBTQ2IA plus SS whatever alphabet soup. They won't say one thing. And they're cowards because thousands of children are being harmed for life, and they are just pure and utter cowards. So we need to vote them out. That's going to take a while. Looks like Trudeau's going to win again.
Probably.
So if you can't affect change through changing your government, you affect change by taking it to the street and going directly to the people, because it's up to us to protect our kids, not the government. So it's up to us as regular people, not the governments, not corporations, because they're all in on this too. It's up to us to spread this message to other parents so that they can protect their own kids, so they can teach their kids about what's going on, so they can tell their kids the truth before the lies that are taught in school get into these kids' heads. That's my theory.
Well, and there is another kind of place, I guess, to jump off from, in the sense that a lot of people I know are trying to either put their kids into the private system, which in British Columbia, unlike the Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, and I think all the way to not Nova Scotia, though. Nova Scotia doesn't have a Protestant Catholic. It only has a Catholic, I think, or something weird like that. Some weird allowance. But every other province basically has a public-private school board, right? So they have a religious or parochial school system that is subsidized by the taxpayer and is essentially just another piece of the public system. In BC, we have an impermeable wall there due to our founding. Very paranoid Orangemen, right, who were ex-Confederates building British Columbia, tried to keep the public and private, the religious and the secular sphere apart. So in BC, there's a little bit more of a chance, maybe, in our private system to keep these things out, though not entirely. But I know that a lot of people are trying to either put their children through the private system or even homeschool them. I was raised in the public system myself. I'm not interested in abandoning it entirely. I believe in public education, but if this is the kind of thing going on in it, and my taxes are taken off my paycheck regardless, and I don't get to choose what school they go to, and even if I get involved with the school board, the consensus is already there. What means are really left to me? What do I do if I want to fight against this?
Nathan, it's in the private system too. The private schools still have to follow the provincial government's mandated curriculum. So the government doesn't provide any school materials. They just write the curriculum, which states that you have to teach gender identity. So I don't want to scare people too much. A lot of this depends on your teacher and your school. Obviously, if kids are going to Christian school, they're not going to get as much of this, right? If you end up with a woke teacher in the public system, get your kid out of that class immediately. Don't wait until tomorrow. Just go pull them out. Honestly, because these woke teachers are dangerous. They're going to indoctrinate your children. But most teachers aren't quite there, so it really depends on your teacher. But having said that, outside speakers get brought in. There was a school in Coquitlam, BC, just a couple months ago where they paid this person named Alex Gino, who is a trans-identified male, a trans woman. I prefer the term trans-identified male. Anyway, this person wrote a children's book. We've written a couple, actually. And one of these books, I've read it. It's about a little boy who wants to be a girl, and one day he meets this little girl who lends him a pair of her panties. And he goes into the bathroom stall and he pulls on these panties, and they're so light and airy, and they feel like nothing at all. And he looks down and he sees the little hearts on the panties, and he realizes finally he's who he's supposed to be. This is a autogynephilic male fetishizing his own thing into a children's book, right? Writing about his own fetish, essentially, in a children's book, and then getting an award for it. And then he gets paid $650 to read it to the entire school. So in that case, yeah, you can have a normal teacher, but kids are still getting fed this stuff in PE. It's kind of, these gender identity lesson plans are kind of woven into everything. And it's presented as being about anti-bullying, which is awesome. But you can teach anti-bullying, and at the same time, you can teach that biological sex is a real thing. And you can teach that gender nonconformity is a beautiful thing, because it is. Don't conform to your gender if you don't want to. Go for it. Girls have short hair. Wear jeans. Play in the mud. Nobody cares. Like, be whatever you want to be. But we don't erase the existence of science and tell you that you'll be happier by medically altering your perfectly healthy body. Kids can't consent to these decisions. They don't know what's up. Most of these kids believed in Santa Claus just a couple of years before. Some of them still might when they start on these treatments. I'm serious. So, yeah, it's just all, it's a disaster. It's evil. It's full of lies. And we have to realize that nobody is going to change this except for us. Nobody else is going to do it. It's just going to be us. So that's what I'm trying to hopefully inspire some people to do. But I don't chase people. I don't try to get people to come out with me or whatever. I'll post where I'm at and I'll invite people to come out. But you can only do what you can do yourself. And hopefully it inspires other people to start acting. And I think it will. But for now, it's still usually just me out there on the street.
Yeah, well, it all starts with one. It's very inspiring. I want to be very clear here. I'm not just trying to butter up my guest here and for the commenters and whatever else. I'm genuinely inspired by the stance you've taken, Chris. And it's also important, I think, to understand that, like, again, it's in our time of weak leadership, politically speaking, no one is going to get this done but us. No one is going to get this done but us. And I think that's been proven immensely, even through the pandemic and that sort of thing. Perhaps something to kind of really lock into a little bit here is again, this concept of blocking puberty. And the reason that I want to kind of dwell on that for just a moment is I'm like even reflecting upon, like I'm only 30, right? So, I mean, I've not been an adult forever. And I'm 31 to be precise. And looking back to my own, experience of puberty and that sort of thing, and looking back to that of my friends and that of my peers, and I'm sure that my beloved would have something to say about this as well. Like being in adolescence, a tough time, but pre-adolescence and into adolescence and early adulthood, we all make mistakes. We all do things we regret. We all have awkward phases. We all remember, now we have social media to remind us of the terrible pictures we took. But, thankfully, I'm still a child of the 90s. So most of those pictures still locked away in a photo album somewhere, so they don't come up on my feed again. But this is something that we all wrestle with. Like we were through a time of change in our life. And then things finally settle back down as you kind of come into your own. You're into your either very late teens or into your early 20s. You're finally starting to kind of get your feet out from under you. You don't look like a molting duck or a molting goose or whatever. You don't look totally silly anymore. And that was just a rough time. And that's just what it is, both culturally, and I guess even spiritually and internally, but also physically, like quite literally physically. This was a bit of a rough time and things changed. What are we just denigrating all of that? Are we just trying to prevent ever having that experience? And that's what's being preached here. They're trying to just essentially decouple that rough moment in our lives, this series of moments, those rougher years, and just say, no, like you can be your best self now. This is the shortcut. The reason you're feeling these ways is that you're just in the wrong body. Here we go. We'll give you we'll give you this perfectly new system, and you're going to have perfection for the rest of your life. You're going to be perfect. You're not going to have to worry about all this other stuff that happens usually to people at this time and age. We're past that. We're past it.
Yeah. Abigail Schreier has spoken about this. Girls are having a mental health crisis, broadly speaking. There's a crisis of epic proportions among our young girls. Boys too. Social media. Every single child, from the parents that I've talked to, there's been a social media component. It's always the same story. It's TikTok, it's Tumblr, It's this website called Deviant Art. It's YouTube videos. They get into this online world where there's these charismatic people telling them that they're going to feel so much better and they're going to be so loved. And they are loved, and your parents don't understand, but we do. This is classic grooming. And if that audio clip that I leaked from a classroom in Toronto, a 30-minute audio lesson of a gender lesson given by a teacher, that teacher is grooming these children to reject their parents because parents just don't understand. But all these kids are getting it on social media. And you grew up in the 90s. I was a kid in the 80s. We didn't have to worry about it as much. You probably had to a little bit, but I didn't at all. But now the demands, especially on girls, for how they look, the beauty standards, all of that stuff, if they feel they don't match up, and if you give some of these girls that are having a tough time an out or an option to just switch gender, some of them are going to take that option. If you present kids with an option, some of them are going to take that option every single time. So we're presenting them with a false option. We are lying to them and telling them that there's something else they can do to feel better. And it's all a lie. So we have to get this crap out of the schools, because that's where it all starts. Hope that made sense.
No, it does. And I think that another aspect of this is that, quite frankly, again, this comes from a particular philosophical bent, right? Like, I'm kind of a Tragian in that sense. I'm, again, from the part of the world I'm from, or the part of faith that I'm from, is that, like, life is hard. Life is hard. It's full of suffering. There's lots of hard things in it. If we keep telling people that there's a shortcut, and now the shortcut is literally cutting out your uterus, I mean, people will do anything to avoid pain. People will do all sorts of things to avoid pain. Maybe, I'm not saying it's as simple as that, but perhaps a piece of it is that people are being told that, like, this is your golden ticket. This is your way to salvation. Like, if you do this, like, I promise you, everything in life will be better.
Yeah, life is not fair. I've always told my kids, yep. They say that's not fair. I say, yep, you're right. I do it lovingly. I'm not a mean dad at all. They got me wrapped around their little finger, but yeah, you're right. It's not fair. And the sooner you learn that life's not fair, the better, because it's not. Life isn't fair. And that's just the way it's always going to be. And the only thing you can control ultimately is yourself and how you react to situations. But social media has completely altered the fabric of our society. It's hard enough for adults to deal with it. I mean, look at Twitter on any given night. It's like a hell site, depending on how you interact on it. But it's just full of negativity and hate. And for kids, where it's so much more important for them to be liked and to seek acceptance, it's just the worst. The best thing any parent can do right away is to go garberate your kid's iPhone, because no good comes from that thing. Like, my daughter will only maybe do a school project, something with one or two friends, but there's no social media, and there's not going to be any social media, and they like it that way because they know the dangers that are on social media. And you might feel like your kid's just in the living room while you're sitting on the couch playing on your own phone as a parent, and your kid's over on the computer at the living room desk, but they're off in another world. And you have no idea who they're talking to. You think they're just watching some fun anime videos. This anime subculture is also a huge breeding ground for this trans stuff. Don't ask me why, it just is. So yeah, we never had to worry about social media in the history of mankind. And we've had to worry about it now for 10 or 15 years. Yeah, and it's during those 10 or 15 years that this stuff really took off. And it's a huge reason why.
I think in some of that too, I remember I was, because there are some people who kind of cross over the aisle, right? And people, both sides have read them or heard them and know them, right? I mean, Jordan Peterson is one of those. And another one is somebody who he got close to during his rise to fame. Jonathan Haidt, I think, and Jonathan Haidt partnered with somebody else. I can't remember his name, but they both wrote books around this question of social media, especially as it has to do with young women, and this problem of of course there's differences between the genders. Men need approval from their peers on a lot of questions, particularly around competence and around the ability to make use of things, or to be disciplined, or to be a contributing team member, right, to help accomplish a goal. For women, a lot of it has to do with acceptance of self, obviously, and also their appearance. And in the social media problem, we have, of course, women's appearances are being commented on live all the time, right? That's what's happening. There's a constant back and forth as to what you're wearing, how you're looking, how you're acting. Rumors can spread very quickly. Bullying can happen online. Do you think that aspect of social media is kind of feeding into some of these questions of transition? Is that's what's happening there, or is it something slightly different?
No, it's a part of it for sure. If a young girl is feeling terrible about her body, which a lot of them do, of course, if they can bury themselves in binders and baggy clothes and try to disappear, which some kids do, try to make themselves not be seen, that's always happened. I mentioned the word binders because we're now selling these things called binders to these young girls, which just completely flatten their breasts to make them appear to be more like a boy, because a lot of girls don't want the attention. And all this attention is magnified because of social media, because suddenly they get into their teens and it's all about these impossible beauty standards and all that sort of stuff, the peer pressure. And so, yeah, and I guess girls relate to that. A lot of girls relate to that, so that when another girl wants to then transition and wants to be a boy, I mean, they're all taught constantly that we have to affirm this stuff in school. They all relate to it, and they celebrate these girls when they want to transition. Their peers celebrate them. And it feels good for these kids to be celebrated. They're out now. They've said that they're the opposite gender, and they get completely celebrated, which is another problem, not because they're getting love, but now, a year down the road, if this child realizes that they made a mistake and they get caught up in something, now it's incredibly embarrassing for this child to say, oh, I was wrong, I'm not actually a boy, I am a girl. And they'll get made fun of. And so that's just another aspect of it, is there's this social pressure to continue the transition. And it's really hard for them to get out of it. So parents need to get these kids out of the environment that they're in, where they can feel safe to just explore who they are. And if they want to have their dysphoria desist, if they want to get out of that, they won't be shamed by doing so. Because like any cult, when you leave this cult, you get hammered. They disconnect from you, they cut you off, the same as Scientology or the never really trans. And
you were never really saved.
Yeah, and you're now a transphobe, even though this person just transitioned and now they're detransitioning. And they come under a ton of hate. And it's hard enough for a grown adult to deal with that. It's next to impossible for a kid to deal with that stuff. And it all just leads into this mental health crisis. So again, don't give your kids a phone. Go outside, kick a ball around with them, go do some gardening, go for walks, go for bike rides. Do stuff that humans are supposed to do. We're not designed to sit on a phone seeking approval from a whole bunch of strangers on the other side of the world. It's next to impossible for kids to do it.
Yeah, without being malaffected by it, certainly.
Yeah.
I think something else that's interesting there is that it's actually been a bit of a wrestling on my own end of if I can get personal here for a moment. It's one of the things that I did a long time ago, partly because I'm a conservative. I mean, there was no point being on some of these platforms as a conservative, obviously. Yeah. But I got off of Twitter just a long time ago too, because it just seemed like to be a bit of just people screaming at each other all the time. So I got off there a long time ago. I'm not even on LinkedIn anymore. I got really tired of looking at recent graduate underneath my name. I graduated a long time ago, but I had not gotten as far in a career as I might have liked. So I didn't have anything to put there. So that was kind of frustrating. So speaking of approval, right? Speaking of self-image, identity, and approval. But it's been interesting because ever since I got into this gig here at the Western Standard, I've been encouraged many times to go back onto Twitter. And I don't want to go back onto Twitter. You know, I'm not interested in getting into these fights that don't seem to go anywhere. And again, it's the kind of negativity. I remember I've been a columnist for years, but I remember some of the negative comments that came my way, and that was bad enough. Some of them were better informed than others. Some of them had fair arguments. A lot of them were just personal attacks, and so I did my best to not go over those too many times, because otherwise it could get in your head. And I mean, I was an adult during all of these things. Like, I can't imagine if I'd been an impressionable young person, with some dysphoria or something, or some lack of, I'm not sure of who I am or what I am, which is perfectly normal for a young person. I can't imagine what that's like. And again, I was 18, I guess, when social media really started to blow up. That was 2008.
Right.
But the generation just behind me, and now the generations that, I guess at this point, there are people who are born well into the 21st century who are in their teens, and they've never known anything else.
Right. Yes, I see them every day when I'm out on the street, and their ability to interact, they don't have the ability to interact or to have a rational, calm conversation. I may be old and I may be forgetting what it was like when I was a kid, but I'm pretty darn sure we were able to talk to adults and would never dream of speaking to any adult the way that, or just any human being, the way that some of these young adults are speaking to now. And it's not just kids, it's young adults. They don't know how to communicate. We don't know how to communicate anymore as a society, in large part. It's just, oh, you don't have all the same views as me. You're terrible and you're a monster. And we've seen it in politics. We've seen the polarization of politics. We've seen the left go more far left. We've seen the right go further to the right. And there's a whole bunch of homeless people kind of in the middle now. And we probably need another party to spring up. But there's nothing looking good on the horizon anywhere. So what are we going to do? I'm just going to take it to the people. You're taking it to the people by having me on the show. I'm super thankful. You're helping boost this message, because out on the street, I can only have one conversation at a time. This is going to reach a lot more. But I believe we'll get there in the end. It's going to take a while, because this has to be a grassroots movement, and people have to get brave. And it's hard to be brave when you risk losing your friends and possibly even losing your job. But it's what we have to do, because there's nothing more important than our kids.
They are the future. And they're in the present right now, and they're being attacked. So let's get into that a little bit. So we're here right now. Got some viewers on. This will be, of course, repeated as people click on it later. We tweet it out, that sort of thing. Everything that we can do to make sure that people are seeing this message. So let's kind of take that moment and go, okay, how would somebody who has no idea where to start with this question, they've heard your message, they're like, okay, I want to get involved. What do they do, Chris?
They, first of all, don't look to someone else for that answer. They look inside and they say, what can I do? And they figure it out. Because a lot of people ask me that question. Well, one thing you can do is, I guess you can financially support me. And I'm not doing this I'm not trying to beg for money here, but I'm going to keep doing things, and I have lots of ideas, and I just can't do them all because I don't have enough funding. There's all sorts of things you can do. So that's a very basic thing someone can do. But ultimately, we need 1,000 people doing something on their own. Save your money and go do something on your own. But think about what you can do, because it's different for everybody. It might be that they can just book a meeting with their MP or with their MLA, or they can write their MLA, or they can call them. They can call their principal. They can have a meeting with their teacher, and they can sit down with their kid's teacher, and they can say, I am not okay with gender identity lessons being given to my children, and I'm going to pull my kid out of class if it's done. And that has a huge impact on that teacher, because this teacher then knows that if they teach this stuff to the kids, they're going to be facing some backlash. And they don't want backlash. So they'll teach it less. It's really that simple. If you complain to these principals of these schools, the last thing in the world a principal wants is complaints from parents. It's the last thing they want to do in the day. But it's super effective. And we all need to raise our voices and do this sort of thing. And we need to address it at the head of the snake. You don't kill a snake by cutting off the tip of its tail. You kill it by chopping off its head. And the head of this snake is now the education system. It makes no sense to argue with 35-year-olds online about whatever when our school systems are pumping out 1,000 more kids, 10,000 more kids every year who fervently believe in this stuff and are transitioning, because the situation is just going to keep getting worse. So everyone just needs to figure out what they can do. If I'm in your city, please come out and stand with me. I could use it because I get attacked.
Yes.
I've been assaulted a few times. There was only the one really bad attack, but I've been punched in the head before and had my phone knocked out of my hand several times and other stuff. And when there's numbers, there's safety in numbers. And it depends where you go to. But don't look for reasons not to do something. Don't sit there and say, oh, I can't because it's too scary and people will say bad things to me. You have to be positive and think about what you can do, because we can all do something. 100%.
Something that occurs to people, obviously, of certain persuasions, is there not some way of affecting the school board system? Does the school board have authority to do anything with that? What can they do there?
I met with two heads of my school district. I met with them for an hour, and the man totally understood, and the woman started to break down in tears almost 3 times during the meeting. They are powerless to stop it. They have no control. They told me to go speak to the Minister of Education. So I went over to Victoria to speak to the Minister of Education, and he refuses to meet with me. I found their campaign headquarters because it was during our election, and I walked in, and there were 10 NDP campaigners and another political candidate who won her riding named Grace Lore. And I started talking to Grace, and I talked to her for about 10 minutes, and one by one, every single NDP member in the room felt quiet, and they just listened as I listed off everything that's going on with these kids, primarily girls. Now it all starts with what they're learning in school. Now we're sterilizing these kids. They're coming to irreparable damage. How even in our prison systems now, I got into the women's rights issues a little bit. We're even sending rapists into women's prisons simply because they snap their fingers and declare that they are now a woman. This is happening. It's happening all over the world. They're changing laws to allow this. Self-identification laws. We have a rape shelter in Vancouver called Vancouver Rape Relief, which had funding taken away from it by the city of Vancouver. Why? Because they only allow women in their rape shelter. This is crazy stuff. So anyway, the politicians aren't going to do anything because they know exactly what's happening. I told them all these things that were happening. When I finally got to the point where I mentioned to these NDP members that we're even sending rapists into women's prisons, and this is obviously a safeguarding issue for women, that was a step too far. They told me that I was making them feel unsafe just by speaking this truth, that they had to make this a safe space. I always hear these same words. They use the same words constantly. Safe space, safe space, safe space. And they kicked me out. So I came back the next morning. And what was their response to learning all this truth about harm coming to children? Their response was to hang the transgender flag underneath the Minister of Education's political poster. Rob Fleming is his name. He's not the Minister of Education now. He's transport or something. Now our Minister of Education is called Jennifer Whiteside, and she refuses to meet with me as well. And they're very aware. They know exactly what's going on. People are following my Twitter. I had breakfast one morning at the legislature. There's a restaurant you can go to. And I tweeted out a few things while I was at breakfast about how I was there. And security came down to ask me to delete something because someone in the government building was following me along on Twitter and didn't like that I'd exposed something. And so armed security came down to get me to delete something. Like, it's just nuts. But that's Big Brother. They're watching.
Yeah.
And they're afraid. They're afraid because they know that this is working and they're getting a lot of heat.
Well, I mean, there's an open standing invitation for you to come up here to BC's Northern Capital anytime. And I and some people would be, I'm sure I could get a few more of us to stand with you. Maybe bring enough sandwich signs for all of us, or maybe we'll start making T-shirts.
I have a lot of extras.
Perfect. I mean, but ultimately, this is where things, the rubber hits the road. And ultimately, I mean, for those of us on a certain side of the spectrum, right, if everybody put down their tools, there would be no more, unborn children destroyed. To the same point here, if everybody put down their scalpels, there'd be no more, women and children and young men, young women mutilated in this way. And they just use their conscience and object to be like, no, you know what? I think that sex and gender are connected, and I believe in our bifurcated system. And we have sexual relations in order to create new children. So obviously, sex is pretty essential. Ergo, I'm not going to participate in this. And that always seems to be the way. I mean, if you just put down your tools and not work for the abusive employer, if you just put down your weapons and not fight the war, maybe things would change. But anyways, to this question, if people do want to support you or follow you or learn more about this, as you made very clear, people don't understand this. This is the single biggest thing. Speaking of education, there needs to be education around this. People probably still think, for the most part, that it's just kids wearing different clothes or growing their hair out or cutting it short or calling themselves a different name. The idea that they're being handed pharmaceuticals and being inalterably altered, irrevocably altered, that is not a concept in most people's brains. Even with the information I had before we started this conversation, I have learned a lot from you through the course of this conversation. So where can people get educated so that they can get motivated, so that they can get out there and start doing the work?
My website is a good primer. Billboard Chris, it's just spoken in normal language. It's not a scientific paper. I have links to the studies on there. I have links to SOGI. I get into the science of how these puberty blocking drugs work. And that'll get people up to speed pretty quick. They should follow me on Twitter. My Twitter handle's on there. That's where I do all my campaigning. So I have 8,000 or 9,000 tweets now, all on this subject, because this is my sole focus. I am solely focused on this. It's single issue focus. It's the only way to do it. If you talk about anything else, you start losing supporters because people have different opinions. But on this issue, pretty much everyone agrees. And they can reach out to me. They can email me if they want to bang some ideas back and forth about what they want to do. I'd be super happy to help, because I've had a few thousand conversations out on the street. I've talked to hundreds of parents whose children have been affected. And I guess I have a pretty unique understanding of some of these things. I'm not an expert by any means, and I'm not claiming to be, but I've had a unique experience here, which has given me some insight. So I'm happy to help anyone, and they can always reach out to me and I'll always get back to them. But ultimately, this comes down to personal responsibility. Do whatever you're comfortable doing, and then do something a little more. And once you move out of your comfort zone, your bubble gets a little bigger. I wasn't comfortable doing all this stuff. I didn't want to do media and everything in the beginning at all. But I felt like I had to. So that's what I'm doing. And we can all do something. There's nothing special about me. I'm a zero. I'm a nobody. I'm just a guy living on the suburbs with a couple kids who got tired of it one day. And I had a couple signs made. They don't cost a lot of money. And I just go out and I hang out and I have conversations. And that's all I'm doing. This isn't rocket science. Anyone can do this.
No, it's very straightforward and it's very effective. It's how organizing used to work in the world. And how, everything from the some of the greatest movements that got us our freedoms and our rights as workers and that sort of thing. Of course, even the rights of women. This is how it happened. And it should also be the way that we preserve the family and preserve the integrity of people, so that, they can actually live innocent lives and live whole lives and not come to harm.
Yeah.
I've been speaking.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's not a problem at all. Again, Chris, thank you for being with us. And thank you so much for your explanations, everything here. Are there any kind of last thoughts you want to share with us?
It might be a basic thought in a lot of parents that their kids aren't going to be affected by this. And that's a dangerous thought to have, because every parent whose child has been affected by this thought that same thing. And so, at the very least, you don't have to do outreach. No one's making anyone be an activist. I'm a reluctant activist. But at the very least, you have to get informed on what's going on, and then you have to inform your child the truth about these things. Because it is simply a matter of how many times the schools are going to try to indoctrinate them. Not if it happens. It's going to happen. For kids that are starting in kindergarten now, by the time they get out of grade 12, they will be so indoctrinated. They'll have had hundreds of these lessons and whatever. It's a cult. And the brain is a fragile thing. It's easily manipulated. And once an idea gets in these kids' heads, it's really hard to get it out. So at the very least, parents need to get informed, and they need to have these discussions with their kids. And they need to tell the school that they're not okay with their kids being taught this gender stuff. Because it's lies. It's not about not being inclusive and not being kind. It's not about being against gender nonconformity or anything like that. They are lying to our children, and kids are coming to harm. And it could very well be your child, honestly. Because this is the same story repeating every time. So, yeah, don't be an activist. You don't have to do anything, but you have to protect your kids, and you do that by first getting informed. So that would be my final message. Thank you.
And I hope that people do get informed and that they visit your website. Again, billboardchris.com. You can follow Chris Elston on Twitter as well at the same handle, right? Billboard Chris?
No, it's at Christoph Elston. Christoph with a PH. But just go to the website. The Twitter link is there. All my tweets are on the website too. So you don't have to go on Twitter. You can just look at my tweets and click on the link from the website.
And support him if you can, and stand in solidarity if you can. If you see him in your neighborhood, maybe go up to him, give him an encouraging word if you believe in the work he's doing, and take a stand for a time and see if we can't change the world together. Chris, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Nathan. I appreciate it. Have a good one.
Thank you so much. We'll be having Chris back on at another time. I'm sure we'll get some updates from him, and I'm very thankful to have him here. Again, thank you, Chris. Well, there's a lot of pieces to this whole thing. And I think what kind of touches me the most is, again, that question of solidarity and the need to protect the most vulnerable. I think that when we look at it from any perspective, of course, I'm looking at it from mostly a religious and a traditionalist perspective, but still, the most vulnerable members of our society, which is children, obviously, if they're being subjugated to this kind of abuse and this kind of indoctrination about something that's so fundamental to their nature. I mean, sexuality and the literal physical parts of your sexuality, it doesn't really get much more intimate than that, right? That's pretty close to the chest. No pun intended, I suppose. But the point is that if we're allowing this to happen, and I mean, I'm just kind of bewildered here as to how we let that happen. How did we allow this to happen? I have some theories about that. I could shoot from the hip right now, but we'll just dwell on the shock of it all, that this is happening. Some terrible things are happening. And we have to do something about it. Obviously, we can't allow this to go on. The the simplest, of course, answer would be if anybody who was participating in this simply stopped. I mean, it's like anything else, right? Like if everybody who was being abusive and being awful and being evil and being power hungry and being selfish and often motivated by fear, let's be clear, I'm not trying to make it sound as if people who are doing these things are somehow always, a self-confident villain. There's a lot of people who are actually not very self-confident and still villains because they're afraid. In that deep fear, they are motivated to do terrible things. But that doesn't negate the fact that what they're doing is terrible. And so I think that deeper in all of this, we have to be honest about the fact that unless we do something about the fear, unless we do something about these terrible things that are happening to our children, we're obviously headed towards a pretty steep slope and we're already well down the slippery one, and we're headed towards the precipice. Alt-right breakdown. When I was speaking with Stuart Parker the other day, again, we were discussing my upcoming meeting with Chris. I was really excited for it. I was very excited today to meet him and to speak about these things, very important things. Again, I hope you support him. I hope you reach out to him and that you find a way to stand in solidarity with him. It's very important. One of the things that Stuart was bringing up was just that, again, we're seeing those old evils rise anew, right? Eugenics was something we thought we'd done away with, but we're back full bore. And we have to remember, again, not to denigrate those across the aisle from me, but it was a progressive idea. Eugenics, the idea of somehow we could raise all boats by eliminating any leaky ones, to put it as politely as possible. And that was an awful idea. It was an awful idea. And we did our best to get rid of it, but we're back. We're back, right back to where we were. And that's terrifying, because the thing is that even then, there was still a human element to it, in the sense that, not that it was empathetic, I'm not saying that at all, but it still took human beings to do these terrible things to each other. And I think that's one of the other things that really has to be understood about the time we live in. It is so disembodied. Maybe that is the real lesson of the atom bomb, right? If you want to go all the way back to that moment and what it founded, which was the post-war era. It didn't take blood, sweat, and toil to take that final piece of the Japanese empire. It took the dropping of 2 atomic weapons. I don't want there to have been that much blood spilled on the shores of Japan either. That was going to be a terrible fight, and the estimate on that was well into the millions for casualties. And as it was, probably the atom bombs were less. But that's still not an argument that's something we should entertain. It's very utilitarian, and ultimately it founded the era that we're in. Well, all of the Second World War did, but fundamentally that moment too, where we entered an inhuman space, a space where the damage done to one another wasn't done with our own 2 hands. It was done not even with something connected to our own 2 hands or operated by our own 2 hands necessarily. It was done by something that was inherently other. It was a thing we had created, and that thing was capable of doing terrible things to a fellow human being, regardless of the justification we might use. And I think that's kind of the thing that hits me now about this new question of eugenics and the abuse that's happening of children inside of this new phase with transgenderism. Because those pharmaceuticals, they're manufactured, right? We're not just talking about scalpels and terrible things being done by hand to a child. We're talking about this insidious thing that the child's ingesting themselves, but with their own 2 hands. And this is just it. This is the nature of kind of evil in, the late 20th and into the 21st century. It's other. It's a manifest thing that we have created as human beings. We using our ingenious, right? We build these things, and they're terrible things. And we need to be careful with that. There's also a lot of tools we build with that brain of ours, and we appreciate some of those tools. I'm talking to you via one of those tools right now. We appreciate that, but I'm on the same internet right now that will also stream you all sorts of terrible images being perpetrated against people against their will, including the innocent, including minors. And that's just the nature of tools. So I think the thing about Chris's fight that inspires me, especially actually the way that he's going about it, is that it is a very incarnational, if I'm allowed to use that language, but it's a definitely anti-Gnostic sort of message. He is physically going places with very simple messaging and engaging with people physically face to face. That is rare nowadays. Everything is about social media campaigns, and everything is about all the hoopla you can make out of things. It's about posters and politicians standing up and talking about your issue, or getting pundits like myself to come on side. That's not good enough. People need to be met in the street. They need to be met in the street. And I mean, again, from a kind of religious perspective, the church has always grown the best when it has martyrs and when it evangelizes face to face. That's where the church gains more members, right? Is the blood of martyrs is the blood of the church, and it's the fertilizer of the church. It waters the ground of the church. And so the same thing here. If we want things to change, then we must be willing to put our skin in the game and our entire bodies on the line, basically. Obviously, Chris told us he's been assaulted. I knew that before he came on the show. But we need to be honest with ourselves about what we're willing to sacrifice. And I think he's a great inspiration on this count. And so I guess what I'm trying to message to all of you here, or try to communicate, I suppose, is that ultimately, we're not going to get there without each other's help. We're not going to get there without each other's help. And until we have solidarity with these things that would see the least of these, and those who are most powerless, and those who are the most in need of our care, and those who are most vulnerable to harm, until we make a fundamental choice to treat those in our charge as people we're responsible for, and who will answer for if we mistreat them. The actions of that will answer for those things. I mean, for us in a religious milieu at the end of time, but throughout our lives, certainly. Until we make that choice, we are aiding and abetting the abuse that's going on, right? And one of the old religious concepts that I think is useful here is that idea, right, of blood guilt. Like it is upon all of us if we fail to act. And so we need to think about that. So how do we move forward from here? Well, I think Chris made a great point of just like starting where you're at. I think today I'm going to try and reach out to the local MLAs that we have here up in the Northern Capital. We have 2 of them. We have 4 regional ones that are kind of all linked to us. And whenever the premier came up here, when she was premier, obviously, Christy Clark, she would bring all 4 of the pals and kind of do it was a way of her to feed red meat to the base and connect with everybody. So I'm going to reach out to them. I'm not on the greatest terms with at least one of them. I ran against her some years ago. Never really reconciled with her. Tried once or twice, but it's my damn pride. But I think that's the thing, right? These instances, they put things in perspective. And do I care about my pride more, or do I care more about helping kids? And that's kind of what's touching me about all of this. I think that until we make that final commitment, right? The final commitment to that ultimate sacrifice, which is of course sacrifice of self and the conception of self, that we submit ourselves to whatever might come to do the right thing, which is to be not afraid and stand up against tyranny, evil, abuse, and the wicked things visited upon those who are in our charge. That is what's supposed to separate us. That's what's supposed to make us different. As a human species, we have a choice. We always have a choice. We have free will, and we have to make a choice, and we have to choose where to stand. One of the old phrases I always liked was, you could become unto heaven or you could become unto hell. There was no static. No such thing as being in stasis. Human beings are dynamic creatures. And so every habit, every choice, it adds up, right? 51 this way, 51 that way, right? It adds up to one way or the other. And it's not about just a perfect economy or a perfect proportion of what right and wrong actions you've ever done, and that's how you sneak your way into the pearly gates. It is about a way of being. And you can either grow to be a good, strong tree pointed in the right directions, or you can be, a gnarly willow that's clearly twisted. And you know that of yourself. And we all know that. We all know that of our virtues and habits and everything else that's wrong with us. So I guess that's kind of the conclusion that I'm coming to, is that, there are pieces of me that need to be redeemed. And I mean, we all know that, but in this instance, I think the thing is that I've avoided this question myself many times. I haven't really worried about this whole transgender ideology very much, mostly because I've kind of thought of it as it was peripheral and that it's not really affecting anything. It's not really getting anywhere. It's just a very small vocal minority that's making, the lives of us traditionalists kind of painful and annoying, or like they eventually creep up on us on Twitter or something and make things problematic or whatever. But it's not actually affecting anything real. There's nothing really changing out there, and that's not true. And Chris's witness, again, if you want to use that kind of language, Chris's witness to me, to all of us here today, has really hit me. It's really hit me. We have to do something. We have to do something. So, like I said, I'm going to reach out to the MLAs I have here. And just let them know that I'd like them to start agitating on this question. Likelihood of success, probably less than 0. But hey, we did that. We'll try that. Move forward there. And again, my invitation to Chris stands. I hope that Chris does come up to Prince George, and we bring him on, and even in the flesh here on the spot we have here, but also maybe we could even do some stuff. Yeah, we've been talking about doing field trips with this camera and with all this stuff. We've been talking about doing that. So maybe we could do some kind of pre-recording thing. We do like I don't know, can we get pulled? I'm looking at my producer. Can we get pulled off of YouTube for referencing Change My Mind? I don't know. Like, I'm not saying that we're going to do it exactly that way. And I always thought that Mr. Crowder, a native Canadian, let's remember, was a bit bombastic at times. Maybe we could do it more politely, but I think that's another thing there. It's another opportunity. I think that's something else we do need to do, because we do need to take this away from the ivory tower that we've built here on this stage, this sound stage we have here, the place where we do our filming, and bring it out to the people and bring it out to common folk and make sure that everybody feels like they have participation in this process. I was saying this the other day, like, all of this stuff can kind of be propaganda, right? It's all propaganda in a sense, right? It's either propaganda the right way or propaganda the right way or the wrong way. But maybe one of the ways you propagandize, is that a word? You take it down a notch from kind of its over polished sense, and you bring it back to the people, is that you do just go out on the street where the lighting isn't perfect and the microphones pick up the background noise, and people get to say what they really think. Obviously, we're not going to have any, Holocaust denial on the show or swearing. That's, get away with about the S word here. And, I just said, damn, I don't think I'm going to get pulled for that one. That's about it. But outside of those two things, I mean, people have a right to express themselves, and this is a platform where they can do that. And I mean, there's plenty of people in downtown Prince George, which is where we are, obviously, or throughout the interior of British Columbia and all the way down to Vancouver, and Victoria, that I'm sure have things to say. So if we ever get the funding to put it together and, do our own kind of docu-series or whatever, or start talking to people on the road, maybe we got to outfit the travel trailer that mom and dad have. I mean, they're not using it for anything else. And get out there on the road and start talking to British Columbians and us fellow Canadians and Western Canadians. And today was actually a pretty sovereignist free day. We didn't talk much about separation or any of that. That's fine, because we have to have days with real conversations. This one certainly was a real conversation. It really hit me kind of square between the eyes. And I think the way that we move forward on this question is, again, that solidarity, offering something. I mean, again, to use again language from another time, like the missionaries have to stay somewhere. And so if it's as simple as that, if it's as simple as the next time, if Chris ever does come up here, if nothing else, right, there's a place for him to stay here where he knows he won't be harassed, right? He's not going to be harassed here. This is a safe space here in my home. That way he knows he doesn't have to worry about that expense. He knows that he knows that then he has somebody to go and stand out with him in solidarity as well. And somebody, I'm not saying I have all the connections in the world, but I know that the young people that I'm a part of, who are very, very traditionalist in their morality and very strong in their faith, absolutely believe that this is a threat, absolutely believe something must be done. when it comes to this harm being visited on children. And they would be willing to come out. They would be willing to stand out there and take the abuse, because I mean, they already do that when it comes to questions of abortion, that sort of thing. We're not going to relitigate that right now. I'm not going to get into that, but I just mean that, it's something that I've experienced. It's something that I've seen, and you do have to bear witness. You have to bear witness to the truth. I mean, if we're calling ourselves religious people and we won't bear witness to the truth, then we're not really very good religious people. So, no, it's been time. This episode, it's kind of affecting me, which is good. It's good. Again, like I said, sometimes the polish, sometimes the scene, sometimes what's going on here is it can inflate your ego, and it can make you think you're bigger than you are and make you think you're better than you are, but you're not. And I'm just thankful to have had this time with Chris. It's definitely shaped my mind on this question, and I hope it's shaped all of yours. And I do hope that, again, you support him either directly if you can, and if not, indirectly through, reach out to him, encourage him, tell him that what he's doing is a good thing, because I'm sure there's some really hard days out there by himself, standing, waiting for the next assault to come, waiting for the next person to come up to him and swear him out of the, try to swear him off the street, and to discourage him. And so encourage him, offer the help you can, and then look around your own neighborhood as well and be like, okay, what would I do if I wanted to change this? What would I do? We're actually at a pretty busy corner here, where I live, and the fence we have faces an intersection, actually, where a lot of people drive by. It occurs to me that, given that the fence is already half falling apart anyways, and plywood sheets are through the roof, so I have to go find some spare plywood sheets. But we could definitely paint a sign on there about, how kids can't consent to puberty blockers. No question we could do that. Be an interesting thing to have people look at as they drive by, because this isn't an unritzy neighborhood. This is a place where some pretty hoity-toity people live of a particular political persuasion. So it'd be kind of interesting to see what they have to say. Hopefully my house doesn't get burned down. I'll let you know if that happens. There was just one more question there about contact, as well as being able to get a hold of Chris and everything else. My producer's just pulling this up here. There's an email, as well as a phone number. We have, we can do both things. We can either do a screen share, or we can just say it out loud as well, or we can even put it in the comments ourselves, maybe, but we'll rip down there. There you go. Okay, so Chris at billboardchris.com. Okay, so very simple, very straightforward. And of course, the phone number, 604-512-2912. My mom always taught me to repeat that whenever you leave a message, so I'm going to do it again. 604-512-2912. So that was our discussion with Chris today. I'm deeply thankful for all of your help in supporting this channel. All of you are viewing us right now, and we're viewing throughout our broadcast with Chris. And of course, I'm deeply thankful to Chris himself for coming on and for his bravery. And again, like, the sincerity of his witness has changed me. I talk to a lot of people on the show. I do not believe everything that they tell me, in a sense. Like, I don't necessarily just stand up and decide to go and do whatever it is they're doing. I just talk to them on the show. That's my job here. But today, he definitely gained another believer, and somebody who needs to act upon that impetus. What that's going to look like exactly, not sure, but I definitely have been touched by it. So we're going to have to leave it there. I believe that the pipeline is on in 5 minutes. So that is 12 p.m. Mountain Time and 11 a.m. Pacific. Again, thank you for your time. I'm Nathan Giede, your host here at Mountain Standard Time, and do support Chris if you can, and stay tuned for tomorrow. We are going to be on at 9 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Mountain, and we'll be having Stuart Parker on, and perhaps some other friends, to do our weekly roundup of the news and discuss issues as they come up, both for Western sovereignty and the West in general, but also for Canada and what our future might be. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you tomorrow.